Show me one country that USAID was in and education improved. Show me what country where USAID was in and healthcare improved. Their major agenda is to destabilize government. If you think about it, their sole purpose, for example, filling in the gaps in healthcare and education, where is the change? I can tell you for a fact, the average African leader privately is celebrating the exit of USAID because they know what is really going on. Let me tell you, we need to look at what's happening in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. President Traore is standing up. He is saying the natural resources in Burkina Faso, they belong to the people of Burkina Faso. Niger is doing the same thing. Mali is doing the same thing. Every leader must look at what's happening in the Sahel nations. If I may use the example of what happened in Niger when the government decided they were going to take over the mining of their uranium. The French companies that were mining the uranium were paying the government 80 cents a kilo for the uranium, and then turning around and selling the uranium to the rest of the world at 200 euros a kilo. So that one move from the Nigerian government to say we are now going to take ownership of our own uranium, they went from realizing about $1 billion in uranium resources to over 300 billion a year. Do you realize what I'm talking about? No amount of NGO could bring that kind of money. And this is only one mineral. Now imagine the country taking inventory of all their minerals and benefiting from their natural resources like the rest of the countries in the Western world.
Dr. Arikana Chihombori-Quao has just absolutely destroyed the concept that USAID is anything other than a means to destabilize, disrupt, meddle, and mess with Africa and its resources for the benefit of America and the West. A couple of months ago, I was in the UK visiting family and friends, and this USAID freeze happened, and there were so many people telling me just how much it's a terrible thing that Donald Trump has frozen USAID because, of course, it's USAID. Just listen to the name, aid. It must be a good thing, right? They'd never even heard of this before the freeze happened. And now all of a sudden they want to tell us, because they have a bias against Trump, just how bad what Trump was doing. Now, there is a fraction of truth in it, but of course the devil is in the detail. And Dr. Arikana just absolutely decimated what people's perceptions might be. Ladies and gentlemen, it's explosive. It's a knockout. You've got to listen up.
Do you see this as a story of tragedy, or is there something else that we need to be looking at?
I think there's something else we need to be looking at. There is need for readjustments. There is need for realignment. We need to understand the real reason why USAID is in Africa. And not just USAID, but other NGOs. You look at DFID, which is the British equivalent, and many other smaller ones. Their sole purpose was to act as if they're coming to rescue Africa. They're coming to fill in the gaps in government services, gaps in education, gaps in healthcare, gaps in humanitarian services. They're coming in the guise of addressing issues to do with human rights, issues to do with environmental protection and social justice. They are coming in claiming that they're introducing grassroots initiatives that are going to help the people. And so they use that as a way to go into the most remote parts of Africa. They're talking about government advocacy. When you look at it on paper, it all looks really good, but they're actually wolf in sheep's clothing. They are using that open access sounding humanitarian to constantly destabilize governments.
And that's why so many people have the perception that USAID is so good. The media and the whole system around reporting on who these guys are, and like she said, what looks on paper is good. So it's understandable that people think USAID is good. Imagine if you actually wanted to destabilize an African country. You can't just march in there and say, hi, We are a company called Africa Destabilisation, and we're going to come in and destabilize everything you've got. No, we're going to turn up looking like someone that wants to help and do things covertly and overtly in the back.
I tell you right now, the majority of African leaders, and not just African leaders, but leaders in the developing world, are celebrating the exit of USAID. I was listening to a program, I believe it was CNN, and I was jumping up and down. It was a government official from Hungary. He was echoing the same sentiments. He said they are happy USAID is leaving Hungary.
This is in the Obama years. This is in the Biden years. How many administrations has this been operating in? And again, if you hear the words of Jeffrey Sachs, who used to work for the United States, he will tell you these are the ways that they fund the CIA deep state operations, where they fund the opposition of a president they don't like. This is how they do it.
They are always supporting opposition. Their form of government advocacy is supporting whoever can keep the government in a turmoil.
So, Ambassador, let me just jump in here for you. This is a message that I don't think many Americans hear. I think many Americans believe, not all of them, but many of them believe that AID was essentially set up for philanthropic reason.
Where is your taxpayer money going?
But you're saying that there was something else as part of that package, meddling.
A major meddling agenda. Major meddling agenda. The majority of some of the workers, now the average USAID worker may not realize it, but quite a few of them are also operatives who are underground, and their major agenda is to destabilize governments, destabilize countries. If you think about it, their sole purpose, for example, filling in the gaps in healthcare and education, where is the change? Show me one country that USAID was in and education improved.
Africa has been struggling to get off its knees since many of these countries have gone independent. Now, it takes two to tango. There is corruption. USAID and these big corporations and stuff, they use money and means and corruption in order to get what they want. But there are those that totally condemn this. And if the destabilization wasn't there in the first place, there are African countries that want to flourish, leaders that are for the people, like the guys in the Sahel region, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, that are actually doing change and making money from the fact that these guys are out of their way so they can just get on with what they can do with their resources for their people.
Show me what country where USAID was in and healthcare improved. The social services they're bringing, it's peanuts. The American taxpayer needs to know the billions of dollars that are being given to USAID, a fraction is making it to the people.
Look, one of the highest profile medicine programs is PEPFAR, which both Republicans and Democrats here in Washington are really having outcries about. It was one of the signature programs of President George W. Bush to try to respond to the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Africa. What's the view on that front?
Let's look at what HIV/AIDS was used to do. We know of a program that was run out of South Africa where they actually were injecting people with the virus.
I do not think people are ready to hear that. How would you feel if it was your people that these types of programs were helping, and you can put together evidence that states that instead of helping, it was harming? I mean, this is absolutely damning stuff, ladies and gentlemen. This needs to be spread far and wide.
The reason some of the AIDS virus spread as rapidly as it did in Southern Africa, there were some very dirty games being played on African people. They were using Africans as guinea pigs for experimental activities. Even when you look at every aspect, they're using us as guinea pigs. Yes, there is some good, a percentage of some good, but not all of it is done with good intentions. You look at agriculture, they're destroying African agriculture by introducing those GMOs.
I just did a video on Bill Gates and the system by which they are controlling African farmers, and they have their own billionaire interests in the continent at the detriment of African ecosystems, at the detriment of African farming practices, at the detriment of the autonomy of the African agricultural industry.
You look at agriculture, they're destroying African agriculture by introducing those GMOs. You plant your seed in one season, your soil is finished. We used to have seeds that we can use from one season to the other. The introduction of GMOs through these agencies, USAID is one of them. We are destroying Africa in a massive way. A little good is coming out, but by and large, the end result, they mean no good. They can turn around and give us an inventory and say, as long as you have been in Africa and also other parts of the world, show us your success rate. You claim you are helping governments with education and healthcare. Show us your success rate. But I also turn around and say, African governments, why do you need this little aid to assist you in providing proper healthcare, proper education? The average African government can afford to provide those services for their people. Africa has been the provider. If you look at Europe, Europe cannot survive without Africa. One situation that people don't realize, post-World War, when the US came up with the Marshall Plan, what they don't tell you is that the contribution through exploitation of African minerals was actually the biggest funder of the European Recovery Plan, ERP, aka the Marshall Plan. US contributed $13 billion, which is now present day $175 billion, which, by the way, the American taxpayer must be paid back. Nobody's asking for that money back. But what they don't tell you is that Africa, through exploitation of its resources by the Europeans, was actually a much, much bigger contribution to the European recovery post-World War II. Nobody talks about that. Why does such a continent that did so much to help Europe recover continue to be so poor? Let's be realistic here. Let's not talk about peanuts. Africa does not need the aid. What we need is for those who are exploiting Africa to stop. Africa has everything it needs. If Africa could have contributed as much as it did to the recovery of Europe post-World War II, why wasn't Africa equally developed?
You can see the passion and frustration in her voice coming out, because when you think about it, like, it's actually heartbreaking. You know how many people actually suffer on the continent? And suffering is more than just people dying. It's people that have lived their whole lives without self-actualization, without dignity, without the ability to live beyond the daily bread they put in their mouths. Me being here on the ground, when I travel around, I see great success stories. I see wonderful things starting to happen now in the continent of Africa. But there are still those times when I come across those that are in desperate need, and your heart breaks. Your heart absolutely breaks. Anyone with any kind of compassion in their heart thinks to themselves, how did we get here and how can we fix it? And the sad truth is that it's coming from the very top. The very top nations are the massive contributors to this circumstance here. The other thing you don't realize is that you're fed up with all of these people coming over on boats for better lives. Do you know how you change that? You change that by building up your neighbor. You change that by making Africa a place where people want to stay and be happy with. You would give benevolent help to, not the kind of help that destabilize. You would actually want to see your neighbor flourish. But if you would allow the continent of Africa to flourish, people would stop wanting to leave. They would be concerned with building their own space and their own governments and their own, businesses. And they wouldn't be so desperate to get on boats and risk their lives to come and try and live in your countries.
I think this is a wake-up call for the African leaders. To the same extent that President Trump is saying USA first, African leaders must also say Africa first. This is a wake-up call to the African leaders to take inventory of what is really happening in their countries. Do they really need the peanuts that are coming in as aid? What is really going out? If I may use the example of what happened in Niger when the government decided they were going to take over the mining of their uranium. The French companies that were mining the uranium were paying the government 80 cents a kilo for the uranium, and then turning around and selling the uranium to the rest of the world at 200 euros a kilo. So that one move from the Nigerian government to say we are now going to take ownership of our own uranium, they went from realizing about $1 billion in uranium resources to over 300 billion a year. Do you realize what I'm talking about? No amount of NGO could bring that kind of money. And this is only one mineral. Now imagine the country taking inventory of all their minerals and benefiting from their natural resources like the rest of the countries in the Western world. That is what African leaders need to look at.
Do you see that in the horizon of African leaders right now?
They're
do
gonna
you
have
see
to.
them? Who do you see as the standout winners of that kind of change? And who do you think is still chasing AID contracts?
Let me tell you, we need to look at what's happening in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. President Traore is standing up. He is saying the natural resources in Burkina Faso, they belong to the people of Burkina Faso. Niger is doing the same thing. Mali is doing the same thing. Every leader must look at what's happening in the Sahel nations to say, like anybody else, you must take care of your people. You have your natural resources. You have everything you need to take care of your people. Why do you continue to be beggars? Look at what is being brought in by not only USAID, but all the NGOs in your country. It's peanuts. It's a joke that the African leaders should continue to be beggars of peanuts when you are looking and allowing billions to get out of your country year in and year out, if not trillions, in natural resources that your people should be benefiting from.
It speaks for itself. It speaks for itself. If you think you know what's going on in the world, you need to take a listen at these conversations. The full conversation is linked in the description. I'm sure you have many opinions. Please leave them in the comment section. If you have nothing to say, would it be too much for me to ask you to write the words Free Africa in the comment section? It lets me know that you're rocking with the channel, you like the message, and you want me to continue. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.